Well, hello everyone. It's Noah, and next to me I have David Dawson, and he's the lead pastor here at Emmanuel Baptist Church in Victoria, BC. And you have your Master in Divinity from Regent College.
Yeah,
When did you grad from there?
I graduated from there way back in 1999.
1999, the last millennium. Hey, does that make
Yeah,
you feel old? No.
exactly.
Totally. Now you're the author of "Is Faith Reasonable," which is a booklet that you put out. It's free on your blog, which you can find a link in the description box. So yeah, I was reading through this. This is some good stuff here.
Oh,
And
thank
do
you.
you want to just give us like a quick summary of what this booklet is all about?
Sure. I mean, maybe saying that I'm an author is a little bit lofty of a statement, but I found that people don't have time to read in depth, and there's some really excellent books out there. I'm a big fan of Timothy Keller, and
Oh, he's
his
great.
latest book, Making Sense of God, is
Mm-hmm.
fantastic. And I've used a lot of his material in this booklet. I wanted to create something that especially students, but anyone could say, I think I could handle that. I could tackle that. It's not too much. I wanted to give them a good sense of some of the apologetic defense of the Christian faith.
Totally. So let's dive in and just have a bit of a discussion on that question. Is faith reasonable? Well, why don't we start off with, I want to read you a quote from Richard Dawkins, the author of the book, The God Delusion. Some have
Yeah.
called him the Pope of Atheism. And he writes, "Faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is the belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence." So, do you agree with Dawkins' assessment on faith?
Well, not at all. I think this is a big factor in a lot of YouTube videos, especially about atheism, is this misunderstanding of what faith is. I find that there's often, as Dawkins tries to do, make this distance between faith and reason as if the two are opposite from each other. But I think that's a misunderstanding of what faith is. I see faith more as something personal. I see faith as including doubt. I believe that faith necessitates uncertainty, that if you have sight, and the Bible even says that we walk by faith, not by sight. So there is doubt, there is uncertainty, but that doesn't mean that there isn't evidence.
Totally. So I don't know. Can you try to give us a definition of faith, or what is if you can kind of boil it down? What would you say faith is?
I would say faith is a commitment to usually a person, uh, and that commitment comes in the face of uncertainty. There's an element of risk to faith. It's really a willingness, it's a choice of the will, a commitment of the will to trust in someone usually, but it could be something. We're trusting in a way in these chairs as we sit in them. We've made a commitment, we've acted on that commitment, we've sat in the chair.
Totally. So in a sense, everyone has faith then, because we're all trusting in different things at different times.
Yeah, and I would say that even the atheist, or any worldview, any view that is kind of getting into the metaphysical aspect of life, like the beyond, the big questions, requires an element of faith because of the uncertainty. I mean, you think of the idea of what could there be outside the universe, whether that's God, as I would affirm, or whether that's a multiverse or something that is distant from or separate from this universe. I mean, those positions cannot be scientifically discovered because science is contained within um, the universe. And so these metaphysical positions require an element of faith. It's a commitment into a belief based on evidence. It's not without evidence,
Yeah,
although it may be without proof.
absolutely. All right. So with that said, let's move on to the next question. So we live in an age, obviously, where science is a big deal, and a lot of people would say that science has debunked the myth of God. And that really we should only accept facts that are based on science. So, isn't science the ultimate foundation for knowledge? What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that we ought to enjoy and respect science, that science is extremely helpful. There's nothing really in science that's contrary to a religious faith. The putting faith into, or sorry, putting science into a spot where it is the only aspect of knowledge, though, of course, is inherently problematic. Even the statement, only what is known by science can be true, is itself not known by science,
Yeah.
and
How can you
therefore.
test that in a lab, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, and really, it's very simple when it comes down to the big questions in life, like who should I vote for, who should I love, what is the meaning of the world? I mean, what possibly exists outside the universe? I mean, all of these questions are inherently beyond science. Most of the big questions require a little bit of faith and are not strictly scientifically testable. Certainly, things like morality, I mean, any value statement by definition steps out of the scientific realm, but values are incredibly important. I mean, there's so many things in this world that come down to what do we believe is right and wrong, for example.
So if science is not the ultimate foundation of knowledge, or if we can't always rely on science for knowledge, what can we rely on as a stable foundation to make sense of the world?
Well, I would say that reason still takes probably the dominant spot. That we do need to use our reason as a primary way in which we know things. However, this needs to happen within a context of us recognizing that reason is not all encompassing. There's a little bit of a humility that comes with it. There are some things that we approach not really having any way to test them. Like, how do I know that my belief forming processes are reliable? How do I know that the world wasn't created 8 minutes ago with all the memories intact? How do I know that I'm not dreaming? I mean, these things we can't know, although we do kind of act on them. We say that we have warrant for this belief. Even if we may not have absolute certainty. So I'd say that reason and evidence remain probably the most important aspect of the way that we form knowledge. But I would introduce evidence as also including things like testimony, things like trusting other people. Like, you might tell me that your mother's name is Margaret, or whatever it is, and I would say, I'm going to trust you on that. I'm going to believe your testimony. I'm going to work off of that, even if it's not strictly scientific knowledge. A lot of knowledge is more personal.
Absolutely. Okay, jumping off what you said, I want to talk a little bit about, like, can we even trust our ability to reason if we live in a world without God? So here's a quote from Charles Darwin, and he says, "With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of man's mind, which have been developed from the mind of lower animals, are of any value or at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" So taking his concern into account, like, if God does not exist, assuming we're just here, we've all kind of evolved from the Big Bang, that's just all natural causes, can we actually trust our mind's ability to reason?
I think this is very fascinating, and if you want to dig into this a little more, then Alvin Plantinga is the guy. He really develops this, and I think you can find some of his material online as well. He makes the case, along with Darwin himself, it seems, that yeah, truth and survival don't always match up. That if evolution is the defining principle of the world, then yes, our minds are well adapted for survival. But that doesn't mean that they're well adapted for truth. For instance, it could be actually more adaptive to be a little bit paranoid and kind of think, okay, I don't really have any evidence that there might be a tiger over there, but I'm going to be careful and act like there is. And I might actually live longer, even though I'm not actually having true beliefs. what gets even more interesting is when you get into the what we might call metaphysical beliefs, beliefs that are a lot more abstract, like what is the origin of the universe, or is naturalism true, or does God exist, or these kinds of things. It's hard to make a case that beliefs in that area are adaptive for survival. So, what kind of guarantee does my brain have if it's just a survival mentality brain? How would I have any guarantee that it's effective in these higher order thinking? Of course, if we're created by God, who is himself a mind, then it would make sense that we have belief forming processes that tie into truth.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take naturalism and evolution and survival of the fittest as the explanation for our reason, then in fact we have a reason to doubt our reason. And that doubt is resolved in a theistic worldview. So it's very fascinating.
So in a sense, what you're saying then is that for someone who says that they're an atheist, does not believe in God, they actually need to take a leap of blind faith to just trust in their ability to reason in order to...
It might not be absolutely blind faith, but they're really taking a faith in the process of evolution, that survival adaptation is also effective in metaphysical thinking. So,
Right.
And I don't know. I mean, that's a bit of a jump.
Totally. All right. This next question I want to ask you is, some people argue that if God wanted us to know him, then he would make himself more evident to us in the universe. So he'd be more obvious. More people would be like, oh, well, God's just a fact in the universe. So how would you respond to someone who's like, it seems like God has kind of hidden himself in the world?
You know, I think this is perhaps the most fundamental question in apologetics, is why is God hidden? I think a lot of it boils down to, why isn't God more obvious? And if I really think about it, this is probably the thing that bothers me the most. It's something that I would love to have God more obvious. The person that's really helped me most to access this, an answer to this question, is the philosopher Pascal, who I have approached mostly through this book, one of my favorite books, Making Sense of It All, by Thomas Morris. He's a Christian philosopher. I think he's in Notre Dame. Anyhow, this book really tackles Pascal's thoughts, and he has a chapter in here on the hiddenness of God. And what it comes down for me is kind of the metaphor of the game hide and seek. That there is a joy in that game. That if we played hide and seek and I closed my eyes and counted to 10 and opened them up and you're sitting right there, I'd kind of go, okay, well, you're missing the point. I mean, there's no fun in that. And I think there's an element in which there is a joy in the seeking process, that God maybe hides himself so that we have the joy in discovering him. That still may seem a little bit cruel, but there's also a secondary aspect here of us needing to be ready to handle God, as it were. That if God just kind of served himself up to us, we might not be spiritually prepared enough to enter a relationship with him. That there's something about that seeking and knocking and searching kind of process that shapes our heart, that humbles us. So I think God does use doubt in order to build in us a humility, a hunger for the truth, and a sense of love. That Pascal talks about faith, or maybe God's interest is to move our heart and our will more than just our mind. If God kind of wrote fire in the sky and said, I'm God, it's Jesus, like here it is.
Yeah.
I mean, we might be convinced in our mind, but I'm not sure that we would definitely love. a story that I think may come from Kierkegaard, but I wrote it up in the book without my booklet without a reference, is a story of a king who is looking for a queen. He's looking for a wife and can't find one among the nobles. So he goes out and he searches and he finds a peasant woman who he notices from a distance, who's very kind, who is lovely, and he says, "I'd like her to be my wife." Now he's faced with a couple options. He could go to her and say, "I'm the king, will you marry me?" And she probably would say yes, but it might be out of fear of power rather than out of a warmth of love. Um, he could take another option. He could say, "Here, have a bunch of gold and jewels, and let me give you all these beautiful dresses." And she might go, "Yes," but she might be more in love with the gifts than with the giver. Um, so what's a good strategy for him? Well, to disguise himself, to enter her world as a peasant himself, to get to know her, to allow her to get to know him for who he is. And in that process, she may actually fall in love with him. So I think God is hidden, frustratingly so, in order to shape our hearts, to produce in us a hunger for truth and a willingness to love.
Yeah, that's a great story by Kierkegaard. Love that one. And yeah, there's definitely this sense that God wants to be found. Like, he has made himself evident. He came into this world as Jesus, as we would believe, as a man. And yeah, it's an adventure to kind of find him, because he is there.
But we never get past this doubt. That I think, as a Christian, I live with doubt, and I'm okay with that. I think certainty is not even possible in knowing that the simple things like trusting my own eyes. Like, I can't be absolutely certain. I'm comfortable with living within faith. I'm comfortable living with the hiddenness of God. Would I want him more obvious? Yes. And when times are difficult, we want him all that more. But I have had him reveal himself to me in personal ways. And so is he completely hidden? I'd say no.
Mm-hmm. Now, you've written a couple of other booklets as well. One, Understanding the Bible. Another one you just released yesterday, Life with God Through Jesus Christ. So can you give us a snapshot of what those two booklets are about?
Yeah, I'm doing these booklet concepts to be kind of accessible, not quite simple tracts that you just kind of give out, but something a little more meaty, but still able to be read. The one I wrote a while ago on understanding the Bible, I think, is very critical because the Bible isn't easy to understand. I mean, I think perhaps the law is one of the best cases to illustrate this. I mean, you can find YouTube videos all the time of people saying, "Look at how this was commanded back then, and isn't that wrong? Like, why does God allow slavery back then?" And we need to be able to approach the Bible with what's called a hermeneutic, a kind of a way of understanding it. And sometimes we just give the Bible to people and say, "Read it. This is God's word," and they kind of go, "Okay." But Christians have long understood that we read the Old Testament in light of Christ, for instance, that we can see Christ in many things, like the story of the Exodus. Well, we can find him in the Lamb. That Christ kind of affects the way that we read the law. Christ himself read the law in a different way than many atheists today or some Christians would read the law. And so I tried to give a sense of in that booklet of how do we read the Bible and approach it in a way that will help us appreciate the overall story and understand it well. The latest booklet that I put on my blog is more of a gospel presentation. Like, if I was to introduce Christianity to someone and explain it, how would I do that?
Yeah, they're great, and they're available for free on your blog
Yeah,
online. So yeah, there's a link in the description box.
yeah,
Check out some of David's published works. And thanks so much for coming on the channel, David. It's been a
yeah.
pleasure.
My pleasure.